Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. Would Clerk please call the roll?
Chair Bird.
Here.
Councilmember Vinker.
Here.
Councilmember Lowing. Absent.
Okay, thank you. So our first item is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. And I'll just note, Councilmember Lowing has just joined us. So do we have any members of the public who want to speak on unagendized items?
We do not have any requests to speak.
Okay, thanks. And then we'll go right into updates on interagency activities. And I think our staff will probably mostly lead the way on that. Philip, do you have some reports?
Yeah, I got a few quick ones. Thank you very much. Philip Cammy, Chief Transportation Official. And I'll be fairly brief, and then we can get into our items for the day. Just to note again, the San Francisco Creek bridge emergency repairs. There's been ongoing coordination between Public Works, the Office of Transportation, Caltrain, and also Menlo Park staff. We're reviewing the agreements, and Caltrain continues to coordinate and provide us with updates. The Caltrain corridor study, there was a workshop held on May 17th with participants from various agencies along the corridor. The workshop focused on project objectives, timeline, and the hypothetical scenarios based on funding availability. And breakout sessions allowed the participants to provide feedback on scenario alignment and trade-offs. And also, there will be an in-person local policy makers group meeting that's planned for this Thursday, May 25th, 2023, which will be hosted here in Palo Alto. On to the quiet zone study, which of course we'll be discussing later today. So maybe I'll save my intro later and give it a little bit today, right now. But as you know, the Office of Transportation has been coordinating with Menlo Park on this quiet zone study for Palo Alto Avenue Alma street crossing. And we've recently completed study sessions with PTC, Payback, and also a community meeting and through the City School Traffic Safety Committee. And so we're hoping to have that pending today's outcome, hoping to get that to council before break. So trying to hopefully get it onto the final council meeting before the break, 6/19, for their review. And then last item that I have is there was an ad hoc VTA grade separation meeting, which Chair Burt, I believe, is also the chair of. And at that meeting, there was discussion about Mary Avenue, Sunnyvale Avenue, and Bernardo Avenue, and specifically of note, the preferred alternatives were selected for Mary Avenue and Sunnyvale Avenue, and Sunnyvale's collaborating with VTA and Caltrain to finalize an agreement for preliminary engineering in the environmental phase. And the anticipated completion date for the environmental phase is the end of 2024. And Bernardo Avenue is a pedestrian crossing project that's both City of Mountain View and because of the location, the City of Mountain View and Sunnyvale are both working together on. And there's currently 2 alternatives that are being considered and are undergoing the environmental evaluation. And the environmental assessment expected to be finished by the end of 2023. With partial funding secured, and the full funding commitment is pending. And then final design phase is to commence in 2024 after completion of environmental documentation. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm not sure if Chair Bird, if you had anything you wanted to add regarding the VTA ad hoc committee meeting.
Yes. So we had good updates from the cities of Mountain View and Sunnyvale on their grade separation progress. And one of the biggest takeaways for me was Sunnyvale had updates on the bike and pedestrian crossings. The unfortunate news is that the costs are much higher than had been previously projected, and I think that we've been assuming for dedicated bike and ped crossings. They're a much greater distance because they go all the way across Central Expressway as well as the tracks. so the greater distance than we would have, but still on the one that is there, I don't know if it's Sunnyvale Ave in the southern part of their city was like $90 million is the updated dollar amount. And as we've been very serious about dedicated bike and ped crossings, unfortunately, I think that we're going to have to factor in higher cost estimates for that. There are a range of funding sources for active transportation projects like this that go beyond what we even have for vehicular grade separation. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these dollars will have to come out of our Measure B dollars nor city dollars, but they are not cheap. And part of the problem is that they have to be tunnels because with electrification, the height to clear the catenary system is too great to go over. And so that was important news, not welcome, but important. And then I think one of the things that we'll tie into when we have our later discussion on our alternatives was just understanding a bit more on the design of the Rengsdorf project, with it having a trestle bridge that they believe is going to reduce their construction time perhaps, and as well as reduce the bridge deck thickness, which reduces the impacts of the underpass going underneath and other factors. And then as Philip mentioned, we're going to have the Caltrain has what's called the local policymaker group, which Councilmember Lowing is our city representative, and I chair as the Caltrain representative. And we're going to have the first in-person meeting of that in 3 years, I think. And it's going to be in this room. This Thursday from 4 to 6, we'll have a small reception beforehand because people are going to get to meet each other in person, all these officials there. But it's really going to be a workshop on the corridor-wide grade separations and to really familiarize all the cities with these various factors and considerations that we've been kind of learning about and uncovering ourselves over the last couple of years, and to really look at how cities should perhaps be collaborating more if they're adjacent to each other. It's going to be a real active workshop. And so everybody's invited in addition to the LPMG members. So I just want to make sure folks know about it and are encouraged to attend. I think they would like to hear about RSVPs. So you could let our clerk's office know if any folks are going to attend, and they can pass it on to the Caltrain staff. And
limited seating, so hurry.
Yeah, I suspect we if needed, this great thing about this room, we can open up all these doors and fill it out. But yeah. So I think that's my updates. Thank you.
Did you say it was 90 million for that underpass?
It is. Yeah. And they're the one that is at Bernardo. There's a bike and ped one that they had previously put at 50 million, and they're going to have to update their cost. Now that is even a greater distance because it goes and has to change its angle in between the halfway there. And, you know, it's crossing a major wide expressway.
Right.
So how much less ours would be, I don't know, but either way, it looks like they're higher costs than we were assuming going in.
Per square foot.
Yeah. Yeah. Per linear foot. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. That I guess concludes our verbal updates, and that moves us on to action. Is there any other?
I was just going to check and see, do we need to take public comment on updates?
It's not an action item.
Oh, it's not.
Or it's not an item per se, but if we have anybody, do we have any?
Chair, we do not have any requests to speak.
Okay, thanks. All right. So our next item is review of the conceptual plan for quiet zone implementation at Palo Alto Avenue and Alma Street, and a recommendation to the council for approval.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official again. Actually, we are going to have a consultant give this presentation that's before you. I guess I introed this a little bit in the updates, but noting that, today we'll be reviewing the conceptual plan for quiet zone implementation that we, pending your approval and feedback, would be sending to council in late June for approval. And we really coordinated very well today because we've got all of our consultants here today are named Peter. So just not to keep things, make things too confusing, but we have our consultant who's, I believe, is joining us remotely. Yep. Oh, there. I see him on screen. There he is.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can. Hi.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Peter, number one, I guess, Peter Meyerhofer with Kimley Horn. So, Rippin, no, you be controlling. Great. Okay, so just a short presentation here to kind of talk about the quiet zone feasibility study we've been working on with both Menlo Park and City of Palo Alto, where we're at, some of our results, and kind of next steps in phase of the overall project. So we'll start here with the quiet zone basics. What is a quiet zone? The specific study that we're looking at right now in relation to Menlo Park and Palo Alto, the quiet zone process, and then again, where we're at to date and what would be left to bring this project to a conclusion. So, okay. So just some basics. Why do trains sound their horn? So railroads are regulated by the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA. The FRA requires train operators to sound their horns as they approach areas where the railroad intersects a roadway, railroad crossing. The train horn acts as a fail-safe in the event the warning devices, gates, or bells don't work or don't prohibit a person or vehicle from entering the crossing. So train horn is essentially supposed to be loud enough to catch attention. And that's usually specific volume somewhere between 96 and 110 decibels. In addition, they have to sound their horns beginning about 20 seconds prior to entering the crossing. Next slide. So a quiet zone is a section of a railroad in which the train operator does not need to sound the train horn as it approaches a crossing. So for quiet zone to be implemented, a crossing or a set of crossings must meet certain safety thresholds as determined by the FRA. Most crossings would not qualify for a quiet zone in their current state, so upgrades are typically needed to make them safe enough that a horn does not need to sound. So this is achieved by adding what we call supplemental safety measures, or SSMs, at the crossings, and ensuring that the overall quiet zone risk index, which is measured by specific FRA formulas, for the crossings or set of crossings qualifies under the FRA guidelines to be a quiet zone. So, next slide. So the process. So we're in phase one of the study still, but we're getting close to completion. The four main components are agency coordination, putting together concept design based on input from said agencies and stakeholders, public outreach, including kind of, the meetings we're having here today, and a final report. And then the future phase would include implementation, including permitting with CPC and Caltrain, putting final design construction documents together, getting funding, and then of course construction and final FRA certification. Okay. So the agencies involved, a lot of stakeholders involved with any rail corridor, as you're aware. This includes, Caltrain, Caltrans, FRA, CPUC, both cities, Union Pacific Railroad, who has rights in the corridor as well. All of them were invited to our field meetings, doing a field diagnostic meeting in each of the crossings that were part of the quiet zone study, which we'll talk about. Next slide. So the quiet zone being discussed here this afternoon spans about 1.5 miles, beginning at Encinal Avenue in the north and ending at the Palo Alto Alma Street crossing here in the south in the city of Palo Alto. The quiet zone as a whole would encompass railroad crossings at Encinal, Glenwood, Oak Grove, Menlo Park, Caltrain Station, Ravenswood, and then the city of Palo Alto on the street crossing. To install those shorter crossings as it relates to Palo Alto, you can have this quiet zone just within Palo Alto by addressing the Palo Alto crossing, which we'll talk about. This would be a much shorter process to implement a smaller quiet zone just around the Palo Alto crossing than this series of crossings that go into Menlo Park. Due to the costs required for the Menlo Park crossing improvements that would be needed to make those quiet zone eligible. Okay. The conceptual design phase involved, engineers designing proposed improvements for each of the 4 roadway crossings in Menlo Park and the one in Palo Alto. The safety improvements we'll highlight here correspond to the recommendations by the FRA, and all the intersections are meeting both CPC and Caltrain design standards. And so we have had the field diagnostic meetings, and the concept designs that we have completed have concurrence from all the stakeholders, which is great news because that can sometimes be a hurdle. So, next slide. So the main 4 in sidewalk realignment sometimes, and typically with all of them, refresh roadway striping and updated signage. The 4 quad gates are typically the improvements that are needed for the Menlo Park crossings. However, for the Palo Alto Alma Street crossing, we are only looking at having to do a raised median. We will not need to do 4 quad gates there. All of the crossings are going to have refreshed roadway striping and updated signage. And then sidewalk realignment is typically required where you have the 4 quad gate installations due to the added gate assemblies that are put in. And then as a result, the sidewalk realignments are needed. However, for again, the Palo Alto crossing where we're not doing a 4 quad gate system, we won't need to do sidewalk realignment there. Next slide. Here's just a quick graphic essentially describing what a 4 quad gate system looks like. It essentially seals a rail corridor from vehicular traffic and potential for vehicles to drive around the gates if there were only 2. There are 4 quad gates are a typical supplemental safety measure that reduces the risk associated with a crossing for FRA guidelines. And again, these measures are only being proposed at the Menlo Park crossings. Next slide. So raised medians designed high enough that a standard vehicle wouldn't want to drive over it acts in a similar manner to a 4 quad gate system, but with less infrastructure and signal requirements, and therefore generally much, much less costly as well. It still prevents vehicles from driving on the wrong side of the road to move around down for the 4 crossings within Menlo Park, but is the main safety improvement for the Palo Alto crossing. Raised medians are another acceptable type of supplemental safety measure that reduces the risks associated with the crossing for FRA guidelines. So, again, not really applicable to Palo Alto, but here's just an example of a typical sidewalk realignment that would be required when you have to put in new gate assemblies to have the sidewalks jog around the gates, and that typically requires both, grade concrete panel installation extensions at the crossing, and also new sidewalk and ped gates and swing gates installed as well when you have to realign the sidewalk. So again, not necessarily for the Palo Alto crossing. Next slide. With all the crossings, we'd be looking at just doing refreshed striping and marking on the roadway, new signage. Sometimes signage is out of date or not to standard or not in the correct location. So typically all the crossings will have upgraded signage and striping. And this is also a typical requirement from regulatory authorities for quiet zone corridor. Okay, next slide. So at the Palo Alto Alma Street, we proposed reconstructing the medians near the crossing to meet federal minimums with respect to both length and height. This crossing is the only one in this project where reconstructing the medians is a viable option, actually. Because we're proposing to install new medians, the 4 quadrant gates are not necessary here. nor is a reconfiguration of the sidewalk. So what you see there in green, those are the existing. Other component of this first phase of the project was a public outreach where we had, public meetings with the general public. We've had a number of meetings with both City of Menlo Park, City of Palo Alto boards and committees. All throughout the processes, we've been getting good feedback and implementing that into our designs, and that will help us moving forward with finalizing where we're at with this current study, which will be a final report summarizing everything we've discussed in the concept designs, which is here on the next slide. So essentially the final report kind of summarizes everything we've done, the concept designs, and provides recommendations to the cities on what would be needed for implementing the quiet zone in both municipalities. So next phase, once this is done, would be, of course, final design and permitting through CPUC and Caltrain. With CPUC, that'd be the Geo 88B application process. Of course, getting funding for the required That's it. Open to any questions.
Thank you. So first, let's see if we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a couple of requests to speak. Our speaker is Ron Roth. We want to approach the table over here.
And each speaker is welcome to speak up to 3 minutes. And yes, you're welcome to sit at the table and. Yeah, great.
My name is Ron Roth. I live at 101 Alma Street. And this morning at 5 o'clock, when I was otherwise soundly sleeping, the train horn woke me up, as it does most weekdays. Anything you can do to provide a little more peace and quiet, let people get a normal night's sleep in the surrounding areas, be much appreciated. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thanks. Hi, I also live at 101 Alma Street. And on behalf of everyone at the 101 Alma Street building, we're very appreciative of everybody's time and energy and are waiting with bated breath for the Quiet Zone project to complete. And we're all, as we're all very negatively affected by the train horn. And I was also wondering, is it possible to get a copy of the report that you just did?
So I'll just say it, yes, it should already be linked to the agenda item for today.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and just to confirm, I just clicked through and verified it is there.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right.
Probably just referring to the PowerPoint, correct? Not the, we haven't completed the draft report yet, so, but we'll be issuing that to Ripon and companies soon.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, questions and comments? Vicki?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Peter, number one, for that presentation. Very helpful. So I'm looking, I don't know that the slides are numbered. I'm looking at the sort of the intro / summary slide on safety improvements. And I just had one question, but I want to make sure I tracked it all correctly. So I understand that raised medians are what we're looking at in Palo Alto. And while Menlo Park may need the 4-quadrant gates and the sidewalk realignment, it looks like we do not. Is that
correct?
Understand that correctly? Okay. And obviously all of us would get the refreshed roadway striping and updated signage. My question is just about the 4-quadrant gates. I'm wondering, given if we pursue the raised median, would there be any significant incremental safety improvement there? And, then what would be the marginal increased cost for that? I'm just wondering if it were worth it or if it's just not something that we should consider doing in addition. Is it belt and suspenders or is it helpful?
Yeah, well, let you come to your own conclusions. But to answer the first part of the question, essentially the raised medians and the four quad gates do the same thing. So median to qualify as a median for a quiet zone because they wanted to make it very difficult, if not impossible, for a car to travel over the median and go around a gate, right? So essentially that raised median at 8 inches in height does the same thing as a four quad gate system does in terms of sealing off the corridor and not allowing vehicles to go around. As far as heads go, there's already a sidewalk at the Palo Alto crossing with channelization. So there's not a very likely scenario where a head is going to accidentally walk into the roadway in those exit gate quadrants and cross tracks. They're going to be funneled through the existing swing gate and pedestrian gates that are there. So as far as cost goes, it's a significant exponential difference. So on the order of 10 times. So you're looking at, a couple $100,000 for all-in improvements for the Palo Alto crossing. You're looking at $2 million per crossing for Menlo Park. Hence kind of what I was referring to before about, your option as a city to maybe go forward with a smaller crossing now, because it could be a longer process because of funding more than anything for Menlo Park to implement their portion of the quiet zone for their crossings, because that sheer cost. So once you start, modifying and moving gate assemblies and swing gates and signaling, the costs go up dramatically. So,
Thank you. That's very helpful. That's exactly what I was curious about. But I'm curious, that 10x cost increase, is that because in Menlo Park there's also the sidewalk realignment, and does that necessarily come along with the 4 quadrant gates?
It does, yeah, it all adds in. So the minute you have, of course, the cost to put in new gate assemblies, then you have the cost to realign the sidewalks around those gate assemblies. You have new costs for now ped gates and swing gates. You have new costs for extending the crossings to handle the sidewalk realignments, including concrete panels and extending them longer. You do size constraints. So it's kind of a domino effect essentially. And that's why those costs get high very quickly with the 4 quad gates.
Thank you. And I assume that also there would be a speed element so that the Roths could not be awakened at 5 a.m. In other words, I would expect that the raised medians could be implemented more quickly than the 4 quadrant gates and sidewalk realignment. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's obviously a shorter design. The permitting is roughly the same with CPUC going through GEO 88B, but from a design standpoint, obviously it'd be a little quicker. And I would think, in terms of finding the funding for, just approximately, 200,000 versus 2 million would probably be a shorter process too. So that's
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Adrian Brent.
Thank you for the opportunity. I am a member of the Caltrain Citizens Advisory Committee, just for identification purposes. Comments. I will note that happily on the Caltrain line, there are extremely few crashes or incidents related to what is known as a drive around, which is specifically what the quad gate or the raised median is designed to prevent. We are fortunate in that I guess drivers here are very well behaved as compared to the Bright Line in Florida, where they're having all the crashes, and we do not have a problem or history of really many that I can remember going back for decades of crashes related to drive around. So that's we can have take some comfort in that fact. There's no reason why it would increase with this quiet zone. The other point I wanted to raise, I noticed in the Palo Alto Transportation and Planning Committee meeting, there were some members that were concerned about the trains not blowing the horns in case the crossings were malfunctioning. That was sort of touched on in the presentation just today. And I will note that the flashers have a little window that shines light down the track that allows the approaching train operators to see that the crossings are indeed working correctly. They can observe that the gates are down. And there, in fact, it might be something you might consider exploring with Caltrain, but I've seen crossings where there is a white flashing light attached to the gate that shines down the track. And I've seen that used in Europe on different railroads too. Again, the purpose of that being a very clear signal to the oncoming train that in fact the gates are working, they're down, and there's no need to blow the horn. Conversely, if it's not lighting, flashing, then they can blow the horn. So, and then lastly, I noted in the presentation, they're talking about permitting required by Caltrain. I'm guessing that's more like coordinating for doing the construction, because it was my understanding that railroads actually have no ability to stop these issues, but they cannot stop. And I know this because there was some contentious stuff going on in the North Bay with the Smart Line, which is about the same length as Caltrain, where they were establishing quiet zones, and there was some disagreement with the city of Petaluma. And I know that Petaluma just said, well, tough, we want our quiet zone, we're ready to go with it, and the railroad was not able to stop them. So that's all. I think you're very fortunate, and I encourage you to go ahead and that you require such minimal modifications for Palo Alto Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Martin Sommer.
Hello, Hello, everyone. I assume you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great, thank you. For those taking note, my name is S-O-M-M-E-R versus S-O-M-E-R, just for the record. The rail committee, the city council, but also taking a step across the creek and actually working with Menlo Park City Council as well. So thank you very much. Secondly, so I actually live at 427 Alma Street, which is directly across from the University Avenue Station. So I wanted to ask Peter, if I can, would this also quiet the horns of University Avenue Station? And there's two things there. One, University Avenue station is already naturally grade separated, so the FRA rules do not apply. Are they specifically, the FRA rules are for grade at grade crossings, and we don't have one there. And then secondly, many times over the years when I've done research on this and talked to people regarding the railroad, I was told that the reason blown at University Avenue Station was because of the Alma Street thing. So the basic question is, would this also eliminate the horns blowing at University Avenue Station? And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, with that being, a grade separation, like you mentioned, what you're probably hearing is the advanced horns as it comes up to Alma Street crossing. And I wasn't sure about the first part of your conversation or your first part of your question in regards to the actual crossing horns or bells. So even with a quiet zone, you're still going to have bells actuating and making sound on the crossings themselves for any crossings, at grade crossings. What a quiet zone is going to decrease, minimize would be the train horns themselves, which are the much louder kind of component of these actuations compared to just the bells on the grade crossing infrastructure itself. So hopefully that answered your question. But
Right. Thank you. And I guess that concludes our public comments. Ed, did you have questions or comments?
Actually, I had almost the same question that Councilmember Vinker had, but this essential question was when residents ask why we don't have when residents ask why we don't have the 4 grade crossings too, I wanted to know if it's a safety answer or a cost answer, and you basically said it was both, but in that order is containing your last answer to her. So I thought that was very thorough. The second one is probably later in the program, but why does this take 2 years? Is my second question.
I think I can try and address that, Peter. I'll let you off the hook here. So just noting that I think the long part of this project, or the longer part of this now, will be getting all the approval. Noting that Caltrain does need to give us approval to work in their railway envelope, and and we need CPUC approval. So that's the first thing. We need to get those approvals. We have to do that before we can proceed. Then we need to design it. So then we'll need to do design, and then we'll need to construct. So actually 20 up to 24 months, which is kind of what we estimated for this, is kind of considered fast in our world. So
Okay, that's a learning curve for me.
yeah, so typically, I mean, if you look at any of our capital projects, they typically take much longer than that. So this is on kind of a fast track. But I think I will say that, going at it, the impacts for the construction will be greater, all those things. So this is really something that I feel like we can implement pretty quickly. And if everything goes, better than we hope, maybe we can do it sooner. I'd love to see that happen. Just noting that this is one of those rare projects where I haven't heard anybody say, don't do this, which is really rare for a transportation project. I've received a letter thanking me for, thanking us for working on this. It's really rare when you have a project like this. And, really, this is something that I feel can impact people fairly quickly in our world, fairly quickly.
Yeah, good work on this already. So, and is all the public outreach complete now? Is that what I understood?
So what I would say is the final bit of outreach for approval for us to proceed with this as kind of a project is going to be the city council meeting following your approval, and then we would probably have some in the design once we have the project designed.
Okay, great, thanks.
Nadia, did you have something?
I did. I just wanted to add one thing. So a wholehearted yes, as a member of the community, not in any official capacity, but it's a real quality of life issue. I did want to point out to staff, and this is not related to the quiet zone. This is just kind of related to the fact that there will now be this permanent median. The one thing that I noticed, because I happen to drive this crossing twice a day, every day, is that because the turn signal that goes onto El Camino is now a yellow light, red light turn, and the grass is particularly high. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's probably like 10 feet tall right now. When you're coming along the curve as a driver, you can't see when the light has stopped. And so sometimes I notice that people get caught on the tail end of the tracks. And if a train starts, they start to kind of look around and see if a train's coming, and it's mostly the cars that are going, well, I'll point to the picture because I can't do north-south on this, but kind of the cars that are going this way. So as long as there isn't a curb right here, so that in an emergency, they could pull off into the grassy area. The curb has to be on this side for the quiet zone, but you just need to be able to have a pull-off area, because I've seen people panic and sometimes they kind of start to go that way if they feel like they're getting caught. And mostly it's only when the grass is particularly high and they can't read that light, but it's just it has to do with the light which I believe we don't control because it's a Caltrans light. And let's not get started on that. But so I just wanted to say that as feedback.
Just a couple notes at that last point that we can't control the El Camino lights because Caltrans currently controls our segment of El Camino, as they do most segments, but not all. And this goes into a broader question for the future of whether we want to try to regain control of El Camino, and if so, is there a way to have Caltrans funds that they would normally spend for that transfer to us? So this is another example where that matters, aside from getting potholes repaired. So I also want to just understand a little bit more of the breakdown on the costs between what we anticipate is approximately out of this approximate 200,000, how much of that is the design and construction versus permitting, and how does that break down when we look at it? It's raising that median from a normal construction standpoint is not a big project, and yet because of the nature of the agencies we have to deal with and the government process, we're talking about $200,000.
To answer your question, yeah, about 30 to 40 grand for design and permitting, and about 120 to $140,000 for the construction. And then there's some contingencies in there.
Okay, thanks. And then are there prospective outside funding sources other than using our Measure B dollars or things like that?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. And there's various different ones, including not just funding sources, but agencies. We might want to talk to the High Speed Rail Authority to see if they might want to help, because this actually could help them as well. There are other funding sources, but that said, I also want to make sure that we're not waiting for a funding source for the project to happen. So while we're going through the permitting process, we're going to try and start looking for funding sources, but there are some possible funding sources out there.
So basically we would pursue funding in parallel with our efforts rather than in recent years, as we've seen folks turn onto tracks more at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston than at this location. Anecdotally, I have heard a number of the times that it's people erroneously interpreting Google Map directions. And so this goes into, actually, I'll just get out on the table. I'm not sure that it would have any implication on the design here, but as part of our track safety and security, we've been looking at how we can improve. And one of the ways that that I've been interested in, and I know the members of the Means Restriction Advisory Group of Project Safety Net has also thought would be advantageous to keeping pedestrians from willfully going on to the tracks is perpendicular gates that would essentially narrow the entrance to the tracks, where you literally have to go on the tracks, and would also be a cue to folks that no, this is not a place to turn. And I hadn't thought of the value of that, not only to keep pedestrians off the tracks so that they really would have to go out onto the track to get around behind there, but it similarly may have a benefit for these misguided motorists who are blindly following a Google Map directions. So just wanted to get us thinking about that because there may be some benefit there. Now that might be as part of a separate project on the track safety and security, but it's tied into this. Great. All right. And if we don't have any other questions or comments, then what we need to do is, we need to have a motion to recommend this to the council. I don't see a draft wording, but it's basically a recommendation of the quad concept plan.
Yeah, so it's kind of in the recommendation there. It's to review the conceptual plan for quiet zone implementation at Palo Alto Avenue, Alma Street, and recommend to the city council for approval. So
I had the wrong page open.
Oh, no problem.
I'll be happy to move to recommend to the city council the approval of the quiet zone recommendation. Did I say that right? Or close enough?
Conceptual plan.
Sorry.
No,
Conceptual plan words have to be in there too. I'll second.
Great. Any other discussion? Okay, guess we do a roll call vote then.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Chair Burt,
Yes, neighbors know we're getting close to a decision, and then yeah. All right.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah. Thank you. Our next item is to approve the refined conceptual plans for the partial underpass alternative at Churchill Avenue and the underpass alternatives at Meadow Drive and Charleston Road.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Burt. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be turning it over to our second Peter of the day from AECOM for the presentation. But just to give a quick background, this was directed by City Council initially to do additional refinements to the underpass alternatives. The Rail Committee reviewed and went through and helped us to refine what those refinements would be in October and November of last year. And based on what we heard from the rail committee, we've our consultant AECOM along with city staff have made these refinements and are here to present that work today. So thank you.
Maybe I could get control.
Yeah, if you want to share your screen.
Where do I do that? I don't see it here.
Okay, looks like you're in as a attendee. Looks like you're in a, okay.
Try to do.
That's right. Okay, so let's go
Thank
to
you.
the palace. Now you click on share screen at the bottom right. And then click on, so just like that, and click on share.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Right. So good afternoon again. Is this slide?
Oops, what happened there?
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so got Ribbon.
I'll just briefly summarize again, in summer and also some members of the community design engineers who were involved in the early design of the grade separation alternatives. So seeking their feedback and comments, we conducted the study sessions with the rail committee and got their directions on actually discussions on some of those measures that we could incorporate in refining the alternatives. So the three alternatives that we have been looking at are the underpass alternatives for Churchill Avenue, Meadow Drive, and Charleston. So at this point, we were just looking at those underpass alternatives for these three locations that we are upgrading, updating with the refinements that were discussed and brought forward. Some of the rail committee members, member Lying as well as Vinka was not at that rail committee sessions, but those were the discussions that led to the more refinements that we are looking today. So with that, Peter, you can go ahead and provide the updates.
Very good. Thanks, Ruben. And I'll first want to start off. My name is Peter DiStefano. I'm with AECOM. I'm a civil engineer, and I want to concur with what Phil said earlier about 2 years being a relatively short duration in the grand scheme. When I first started on this project, I didn't have any white hair. So kidding aside, let's dive right into the design revisions that we're going to first talk about Churchill, and then I'll pause it at Churchill. And if you have any questions about Churchill, then we'll proceed to Meadow and Charleston. So on this first slide here, we increased the ramp width in the center of Kellogg to provide a little bit more room for pedestrians and bicyclists. We increased it from 10 to 12 feet. And Rip and we also met with the fire marshal as well in November. And to accommodate emergency vehicles, Kellogg was widened about 5.5 feet on each side of the road to provide 16-foot lanes, as you can see there on the cross section, on the typical section. Tree removals and relocation of the overhead electrical lines will be required to accommodate the widening. The back of the sidewalk, as you can see again there on the typical section, will remain where it is today, and no property acquisitions along Kellogg would be required in this configuration. But again, they're in Kellogg. And we also made some refinements along Alma Street to provide a little bit like safer and more pleasant experience for pedestrians. We added a 4-foot buffer or / landscape strip, again, to provide a safer, more pleasant experience for pedestrians. This requires a partial property acquisition, the total length of about 1/4 mile. We also made some revisions to the ramp layout on the west side of the tunnel near the high school.
the configuration of the ped and bike path here next to the high school has been revised to minimize potential conflicts with bicyclists traveling in opposite directions along the Embarcadero bike path. A one-way path on each side of the ped bike ramp is now provided as shown on the typical section. Yeah. So this was a really good suggestion. What this does though, it makes it a little bit wider footprint. So the bleachers of the high school would have to be reconstructed in this configuration. Focusing on towards the Churchill area here, we, in similar to what was done on Kellogg, the width of the ped bike path has been increased to 12 feet from the original design of 10 feet. That's shown there where the yellow arrows are pointing to. We also made some design updates to the underpass itself. The bridge geometry over Churchill was modified to reduce the span length and to minimize property impacts near Mariposa. There was removal of the center bridge column a bit further north, away from the home on Mariposa. So that resulted in some reduced construction costs. We also made some adjustments to the pedestrian bridge geometry over Churchill. The bridge was widened 2 feet, again, from the 10 to 12 feet. You'll hear that as a recurring theme today. And the southwest edge of the deck was rounded to provide better line of sight for bicyclists, making the 90-degree turn at the south end of the bridge. It's to provide that better movement for that 90-degree bend. So those were the updates that we made to the Churchill underpass. I'd be happy to answer any questions about Churchill.
Great. Why don't we go ahead and have colleagues' questions? And I think even because this just so naturally broken up between Churchill and the Meadow Charleston, we can even hear from members of the public on Churchill and then going forward. So why don't we do that first? Do we have any members of the public wish to speak? And if they have signed up for this whole item, what we're going to do is go ahead and let folks speak on Churchill at this time. And then when Meadow and Charleston are discussed, they can speak on that specifically.
Yes, Chair Burt, it looks like we do have one member of the public who wishes to speak. Just give me one moment. Oh, I seem to not be able to share my screen because of the presentation, but Martin Summer, you can go ahead and speak.
Martin, are you there? Well, we'll go ahead and you can have an opportunity when we talk about Meadow and Charleston. So
I just want to make sure. I thought it said it shows 2 participants with raised hand there. I just want to confirm. Sorry.
Oh,
Apologies,
I do
Chair.
also see Mike Price.
Okay, great.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I have a question regarding the right-hand turn pocket on Churchill Avenue turning south on Alma. That turn pocket is smaller than the turn pocket we currently have, and that is hardly adequate for the use. So the question is, why is it there? Why not just eliminate it?
If staff would like to go ahead and respond, I'll just note that Mike is actually the person who generated
the eastbound right turn lane from Churchill to southbound Alma.
Yes.
Okay. This was the feedback that we received from our traffic consultant, Hexagon. So if you're saying this is shorter than the existing condition, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it's shorter than the current condition, and the current condition is hardly adequate for keeping the thing from backing up. So I'm just wondering if it's has any real purpose.
Yeah, I'd have to defer to Gary Black on that one. I don't know if is Gary on the call?
Yeah, I'm here, Peter.
Oh, great, Gary, thank you. Can
Well,
you take that one?
Yeah, well, there's a trade-off involved, of course. The longer the lane is, then the more functional it is. But then there's additional, width considerations of lengthening that right turn lane. So it does benefit the operation to have the turn lane there, even though it's shorter than the existing lane.
That it has some benefit, even if it's shorter than the existing condition.
That's correct.
But it would also reduce the cost considerably by narrowing the requirements for the bridge.
Yeah, again, there's some trade-offs, like Gary said. At reducing the span length, I think in this condition isn't going to likely save a lot, and I think the traffic operational benefit would be probably pretty significant if this could potentially avoid queuing back towards Castellea, towards El Camino as well. Gary,
Blocked pretty quickly by people wanting to turn left, and so the utility it just needs to be modeled. Thanks.
I'd like to add that whenever the signal turns green, then it doubles the capacity of throughput during the signal operations time. So it definitely helps in traffic flow and makes sure that when the queue dissipates more quickly, but of course it builds up, but then it will dissipate more quickly. Otherwise, the queue lengths will be much longer and they will not be able to dissipate in 1 to 2 cycles.
Okay, and I got a note from Martin Summer, who thinks he's muted on our end. I'm not sure that that's the case, but I want to give another try and make sure he's not on our end.
Hello, hello.
Okay,
hello.
Martin,
Okay,
I've just unmuted you.
Okay, I think you can hear me now, right? Hello.
Yes.
Okay, great, wonderful. Sorry. It's not clear in my mind why the triple bike path between the actual tracks and the Palo Alto Sports Stadium. It seems to me that there's 3 bike paths there. One is offset in the center by height, and I'm not curious why that is. That's it. Thank you. Does that make sense?
I'll go ahead and ask the consultants to comment on that.
from payback, and the reason is in the previous configuration, we only had the ped bike path that got lowered into the tunnel, and then the Embarcadero, the existing Embarcadero bike path remained where it was on the west side of that path that descended into the tunnel. The problem with that configuration is that it created potential conflicts with bicyclists traveling in opposite directions. We had a slide from the November rail committee meeting that showed that a little bit better. I don't have it in this presentation. So if you could get a hold of that presentation and look at that slide, I think it'll be pretty clear and obvious what we're trying to accomplish here.
Okay, Martin, anything else?
Can you hear me?
Again now, yeah.
Throw that back for a little bit more thought. I don't think that's quite an optimal solution there. I think you can have that intersection and two-way bike path.
Thank you. And so now we'll come back to the committee. Ed?
Yeah, a few questions on sort of right-of-ways. So the landscape removal in that landscape strip along Kellogg, that's totally in city control, right? I mean, that's basically public property, and that's where we're going to remove the trees.
So at the rail committee's session previously, there was a request to add some consider additional. Sorry,
I'm talking about Kellogg.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Kellogg. Yes, it all exists.
Okay, now I'll talk about Alma. So that quarter mile you said had partial property acquisition. Can you drill down on that, what that means in terms of how much and what we have to do to get it and all that?
So it's about 4 feet buffer that we are adding, and for that 4 feet additional buffer, that's what we would need to have some additional right of way.
From how many homes?
10 to 12.
Yeah, it's, I'm sharing my screen again here. It's from just north of Kellogg to just south of Coleridge. So yeah, it looks like about a dozen homes.
Okay, and the trade-off there, to stay with your terminology, in terms of putting in that buffer, I mean, there's not that much more space for the pedestrian to walk, right? It's just a little bit further from the paths of the cars.
Right, exactly. The pedestrians would be right up behind the curb and gutter, right next to the vehicles traveling on Alma at relatively high speeds. Wanted to provide a little bit of a buffer between between the pedestrians and the motor vehicles. The buffer actually also provides the ability for the homeowners to place their recycling bins as well. That's the current condition they have today. So, without that buffer.
Work at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, then moving on to Mariposa, with this design, then you don't have to take any extra land there. Is that what I understand?
There is still some acquisition of the home at Mariposa, but it's much less than it was previously. I think it was, we ran some numbers recently. I think it was like 600 square feet less, which
so 600 square feet less, but I don't know where you're starting from. So what percentage do you take?
Yeah, I want to say it was maybe 1,000 or 12, so maybe half
of land. So it's not part of the house, it's part of the land.
Right. It's just part of the site
construction. Is that the same thing that we would have to negotiate with them about that? Because we don't have any.
That's correct there. Yeah, it would be a negotiation.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm sorry, go
ahead.
No, I was just gonna add to that. We're really tight on the space on the high school side, of course, so that makes the seal, and that there's a slide later in the presentation about seal, the crossing at Seal Avenue and at Pierce Park.
Were you still going to talk about seal?
We do have a slide in
Churchill.
Well, it wasn't included with the Churchill slides, but it's later in the presentation. We probably could have included it.
Well, let's go ahead. Let's go back to you and let you present that, because that's part of the whole Churchill area.
The tracks are running up and down on the screen here. It's on the east side of the tracks, a very similar configuration that's at Kellogg, but on the west side of the tracks with the open space there with the tennis courts there's a lot more flexibility for the design. We're not confined right up against the bleachers and the right of way. No Caltrain to request additional length of tunnel to be complete outside of the right of way. If we were to keep it at Kellogg, here it's just, you can see here on the screen there, the pink lines represent the Caltrain right of way. So the tunnel spans completely underneath the right of way. So there's no issues with the ramps and the openings to the tunnel being within the Caltrain right of way. So for a variety of reasons, this site has got some benefits to it versus the Kellogg site.
Yeah, I'll just add, because I think it was last fall rather than the first this year when we had looked at seal the first cut at the Kellogg and talked about the seal. And so it wasn't this committee, but the committee composition at that time was pretty unanimous that Kellogg, because of all the impacts on the school property, we ended up getting a real concern expressed by PAUSD, and then just the kind of the complexity of navigating the up ramp on the Pali side versus what we're seeing here of being able to use not only is it Pierce Park, right?
Yeah, Pierce.
But I think it's even an existing little access roadway. Is that?
It's not exactly right at the access roadway. So, I guess just to give a little further elaboration on this, the connection out of the park. I mean, this really just gets you to the grassy area.
Got it.
So the connection out of the park would need to be established as well. So there's a little bit more.
It could go different ways.
It could,
at ground level.
So that's, I would say the key difference is that there's a lot more flexibility with this than the Kellogg, but also with that flexibility, there's not the path right there that you would connect to. You really want to get over to Park.
And I would say that the committee in the fall wanted to just spend no more effort on Kellogg, but the problem was that there had been a year or more than a year before that, council direction to look at these alternatives and both alternatives. And so we really need to go back to the council, perhaps with a recommendation by this committee on where we should be spending our attention, whether we should put any more effort on the Kellogg alternative at all versus Seal.
And
Which
sorry,
part,
just to add,
which part of the Kellogg are we comparing this to?
Well, the choice is to have a bike and ped crossing at Kellogg or have it at Seal.
Okay.
yeah, and just to add a little more context, apologies, but just to note that I believe that our last direction from council was to look at the Kellogg versus Seal discussion in the bike and ped plan, bike and ped transportation plan that we're getting ready to have an open council award in June.
And part of the disadvantage to wait in that whole sequence, because first, we've kind of come to recognize that there's a good chance that we'll want to go ahead with a bike and ped crossing here and perhaps down south, preceding the vehicular crossing so that it's in place so that bikes and peds will continue to have full access when we do the vehicular construction. And then second, we've been told by VTA, Caltrain, Senator Becker's staff, all that there is this prospective funding for active transportation crossings like this that is available and won't. And if we wait for the bike and ped master plan, which we all have discussed is a couple years behind as of right now, it would be commenced soon, but then take how long before it would be complete?
Yeah, I really hate to go back and like rehash the whole schedule, but just noting we're not multiple years behind. We're something like 6 months behind when we had originally planned, but I don't want to go through the whole schedule of that. But the reality is the bike and ped plan will take probably about 18 months to complete. But that Kellogg versus Seal discussion is meant to be front loaded. Well, really just in general, Caltrain additional grade crossings is meant to be front loaded as part of the outreach process, which frankly, I would recommend that if Rail Committee is considering selecting a new location for a crossing, that there's going to be some outreach that is necessary. So not trying to say that Rail Committee couldn't recommend that we discontinue any discussion that needs to occur.
In order for, say, the Seal to occur versus it may be an easier decision on what not to do than what to do.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Vicky.
Thank you. And Councilmember Lowing, I think you're getting me back for having asked all your questions on the budget last night before you had a turn, because those were pretty much exactly the Kellogg crossing and the bleacher reconstruction. Can you just talk a little bit about how extensive that is and what the PAUSD role would be in terms of sorting that out if we went that route?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that any of the negotiation that would need to occur for any type of right of way would be, a negotiation. So I think the path to that is kind of dependent on what's necessary. For the bleachers is obviously a little bit easier to navigate than a house or someone's property. But it would be a discussion. I mean, that's really what any of the negotiations would be for any type of right of way.
Yeah, I meant more physically. Do you have a sense of what the ask is? Is it feasible in our view? I mean, obviously it must be, but could you just talk a little bit? What are we asking them to do? Do we know? I understand it's a negotiation, but
yeah. Oh, sorry. Apologies. That the current layout would need to go under what is existing bleachers partially. So it could be that the bleachers actually don't need to be relocated. They just need to be redesigned. It could be that we have bleachers going over part of this bike path. That's a possibility, just depending on design. But we haven't gone to that level of design this early conceptual phase. It's just noting that the current layout would overlap with the current bleachers, a portion of the current bleachers, I should say.
Got it. So that's all kind of TBD.
And if I might add on the current bleachers, it's not really feasible to relocate them. So I know those pretty intimately. I spent half dozen years on the chain gang for the football team on that side of the field, visitor side, and there's no room. So it either would be to reduce the size. If you were not able to build underneath it, you'd have to reduce the size of the visiting bleachers or move the entire football field, track, and home field bleachers on the other side. So
okay,
I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
that's exactly what I was wondering, was how potentially involved, how big of an ask, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, and I want to add some another complexity to that is that those Embarcadero bike path is also in Caltrain's right of way. So it's going to be a 3-party agreement and negotiation. So it's not only city and school district, but also will bring in Caltrain and JPB into that conversation. So it's becoming more and more complex.
got it. So it does sound quite complex on the Pali side, although I am sympathetic to the homeowners on the other side, the 4-foot buffer. We talked about that if we have that, the benefit is to the pedestrians being distanced from the car, and also this the recycling bins. But I would suggest that if there were a way to make the pedestrians, an alternative way to make the pedestrians safe, that perhaps we would even ask those homeowners decision that perhaps we should get feedback on. But because of that, and I was going to ask the same thing about the Mariposa land acquisition possibility. I would really like to see us continue to take a hard look at Seal. I had the same question about what happens to that ramp when it gets up into Pierce Park, and sounds like we still would have to think about how that accesses the roadway, both for general use and to Pali. But with respect to Pali, sounds like we may not have gotten there yet. But I'm wondering if we've looked at for students who approach Pali from the south, from that side, how many of them actually would find it closer to access it from Seal versus from Kellogg. My thought is that there's not that many further north, that there's a lot of them would be coming from the south. And so perhaps Seal is even easier. But do we have any sense of the students' use? Because the one thing we don't want is for them to try to, somehow not use these and get around them.
No, that's a great question. So the answer is we do have that data, and that's part of what
do they call it?
The dot map.
Dot map that we finally got. Took a little while for us to get it. So that informs us on that. But I'll just add that in that context you're talking about, we look at the groups of students who are trying to cross the tracks to get to Pali. And in this vicinity, there are ones who are essentially north of Embarcadero. And then there are the ones that are coming from essentially east of there and south of Seal. And they're the number, the ones who are north of Embarcadero would be able to use the hopefully soon to be improved connection between Emerson and the underpass. And maybe you can give us a little update, because that does tie into this question Vicki was talking about. We had a little update that was a few months ago that was getting prioritized in the CIP, but then I don't recall seeing that in the CIP from the recent budget hearing.
Yeah, so it's actually contained within a CIP, a larger CIP, ACM board, completing design, finalizing our final design. So I should say refinalizing our final design. It's really just updating it to current standards. Ripon, do you have any other updates to that? Yeah. So, yeah, so you're absolutely correct. That is the connection that people to the north could make.
Yeah,
North,
that was kind of my point, is a lot of them could, go on the north side of Pally. And so really the south side, I don't know. There's a lot to like about this deal alternative.
Can I just ask a clarification question on that? So is it sort of one of the advantages of the partial underpass was that we could still keep Churchill sort of open for cars, which wouldn't make the flow go over to Embarcadero. But what we're saying is on the other side of that, for bikes, this could be and pedestrians, this could be a good thing because they can use Embarcadero. So the northern ones that you ticked off would use Embarcadero as some of them already are, but they wouldn't be able to cross at Churchill, and then the other ones would go south to Seal. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Although be able to do that regardless of the grade separation.
Okay, great.
Nadia?
Thank you. So just so that I understand procedurally, is the idea that this is being approved by Rail Committee today and then goes to City Council, or does this just finalize that the things have been done and then it goes to Caltrain because we now have the signed services agreement? I'm just kind of trying to understand the order of what's happening here. Because the council already directed this committee to finish the refinements. And so does it have to go back, or is it assumed that, okay, we're done and now we just hand it off?
Yeah, so I don't believe that this needs to go back to council.
Okay.
It's actually really Rail Committee's prerogative. I believe they've directed Rail Committee to work on this. As I mentioned initially, this work was the work that came out of the Rail Committee direction in October and November. So I don't think it needs to. I think this is just really helping to hopefully narrow the alternative so that when a recommendation goes to council, they can see a more refined, assuming that one of these alternatives is selected, a more refined alternative.
And very specifically under the remaining contract expenditure, are we updating that matrix that was created with whatever any final things are missing? Like, for example, the impacts of the Pally bleachers, I don't think is on the matrix. I mean, I happen to know that matrix really well, but I don't know that anybody else lives and dies by that thing. And I'm sure many people want it dead. But it just a question, because if that does need to be updated, that I would recommend that gets added. And I just don't, maybe you can go explore the contract and figure out what is left in there, but.
Yeah, well, I think just noting, I don't believe that's included in our contract amendments, but that doesn't mean that that's not something that we could, that, for example, might be something that we could add as an update, just a note on there.
Right.
But I think we should maybe hold a little bit on that and see where we end up. With this discussion of Kellogg and Seal, we might potentially not be talking about Kellogg anymore. Just
right.
like to kind of pursue that strategically.
And then if Gary Black is still on, in the question that Mike Price was asking about that turn pocket, I just wanted to understand if the model that we did, is the right turn signal allowing a right on red there during the modeling, because that makes a difference. Because right now, part of the reason it backs up is that you have the train preemption that happens, right? But the idea is we will now be grade separated and we control the light. So I think part of the reason why that turn pocket is still more efficient is, number one, if they're allowing right turns on reds, there's still a little bit of give. And then the second question to Gary is, do we know if that light on El Camino and Churchill, I believe, is controlled by Caltrans and not us? So going back to what Chair Burt was mentioning before, if we take control of the light at El Camino and we can now pulse the Alma Churchill light and the El Camino Churchill light, then we have a much better, much more efficient use, which maybe you could remove the turn pocket as long as you control the other light. But if you don't control the light, then you need the turn pocket for a right on red. And right on red is never great, particularly when you're coming out from under a tunnel situation. So I just don't know what was modeled, and maybe Gary can answer those two.
Yeah. Yes, we assumed that right on red was allowed. And it is possible to do that. I mean, we haven't gotten into any details about the signal design or phasing our operations, but with this configuration, it would be feasible to allow right turn on red.
And the model is with the with the turns at El Camino being controlled by Caltrans, correct? In other words, we can't pulse those.
We didn't under these scenarios with the separation of Churchill from the railroad tracks, we did not get any queuing back to El Camino, so there wasn't really any interaction between the signal at El Camino and the signal at Alma.
Interesting, because present day there is a lot of queuing that happens, which is why folks are concerned about the pocket. So
yes, we're aware that that under existing conditions, the queue does go back to El Camino.
Right.
And also just worth noting that there's another separate project that we're working on at Churchill and El Camino. Well, it extends almost all the way to the rail as well, but that will improve the operations at that El Camino intersection
right
as well.
But that's mostly for westbound Churchill onto northbound Alma, because it adds a turn pocket in that corner, right? Which is the opposite diagonal corner to the one that Mike Price is talking about that backs up right now.
Well, and I'll just note that, so that essentially bleeds there's the backup that is westbound on Churchill, and that would improve that. Any improvement going eastbound creates more backup, not less.
All right.
Coming off of any improvement coming off of El Camino onto Churchill eastbound without relieving it at Alma creates more backup rather than less. That's that whole inducement problem.
Correct. But I'd like to add that as part of the Churchill Avenue safety rail improvements, we are adding an overlap function, which means when northbound left is going on green, then the eastbound right will also get green. So there will be a additional green for that. And we could imply the same improvements, when the signal is built for this permanent conditions, and that would mean there will be more green time for the turning moment and will be more efficient.
More throughput.
The only thing is that it will have some limitations because of the limited right turn pocket length, but it will improve the operations and during the signal green time. Yes.
And then the final comment is, would a thinner bridge deck design impact the length of the kind of separation that's along Mariposa? Or is that depth guided by the depth that Alma has to dip down anyway? Because it doesn't, but in this case, we're only dipping one side. And so we have kind of a little bit of ground to play with, and that we can dip Alma as much as we kind of need to. And we're not dipping the far lane of Alma that's going northbound. And so if you had a thinner bridge deck, I think it helps us a bit here. It might not as much in other situations, but it seems like it might actually be slightly more beneficial. Am I getting that right?
I wasn't sure where you're going with that, but I think in general that, reducing the bridge deck is going to help, because then the roads don't have to be as deep as and low in elevation. So I wasn't following all what you were saying there, but
so what I'm saying is in a normal intersection, when you're lowering all four parts of the intersection, right? Meaning the throughput on the other side,
right?
Then you've got to deal with, how much the intersection, all of Alma drops, right? And everything. And in this case, because we're leaving the far side elevated, we're only dealing with the west side of the tracks. And then you're only sinking the one lane along Alma. So you can actually get a little more bang for your buck with a thinner bridge deck, right? I see Rippon is shaking his head vigorously. So Rippon understands what I'm saying. I'm not sure that Peter does, because he doesn't know the roads as well.
Yeah, and every effort will be made to make sure that it is minimized as we do the design details in the next phases. But yes, we have that in consideration as we move along.
Yeah, the part that I was following when you said dipping one, would you say dipping one side of
right, because Alma has it. Let's see if I have a better picture. But one lane is staying down, but we have a retaining wall, right? So only one lane is going down. Whereas if you have both lanes and the throughput on the other side, if Churchill on the other side of Alma also had to dip, then you have a whole different.
Alma does not dip.
Exactly.
That's right.
And the west side, the southbound, has a retaining wall, and so it wouldn't benefit from having to not go down as deep. Whereas, and Nadia has touched on something I wanted to understand. Maybe it's just in that refinement we can't really quantify yet, but as the starting point of the down ramp eastbound Churchill, if the bridge deck is reduced by perhaps 2 feet, how much impact does that have on how far back you have to allowed? Is that correct?
I mean, you could go steeper, but we use that kind of as a maximum preferred.
I think there's also NFPA requirements that limits us to 12% at the most.
Say again?
NFPA, National Fire Protection. Remember we
Oh.
looked at that?
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yes, I would like to add Nadia that the clearance underneath the bridge will be maintained. And from that point, the transition will begin westerly towards, on that west leg, right? So the constraint point, the most eastern, the western point, constraint point would be the minimum depth that you will have to maintain under the bridge and then go towards the transition.
How much does that pull the whole underpass eastward, the starting point of the underpass?
Right. I don't have the exact number, but I'm sharing my screen here again. Basically, if you raise the intersection up, that T intersection, by reducing the bridge thickness, all the purple area gets tucked in a little bit. So you don't have as much reconstruction. It's probably not going to be a lot, 2 feet.
Yeah.
But it happens along Churchill and along Alma.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So each end will get reduced.
So for every foot, if that 10% would be 10 feet, right? So at 2 feet would be about 20 feet.
Yeah. And
general.
I don't think it's quite as simple as that, but yeah, it's on the order. It's on the
roughly,
order.
yeah, gives a ballpark.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to recall. So the homes that are on Churchill, between Mariposa and Castellea, I'm trying to recall what we're with the current design. What's the impact?
3 homes, one facing each one, and there's one tucked in between. I believe
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
so those 3 homes, the 2 have the access from like the Mariposa and Castellea. The one in the middle will lose the, will be limited to right in, right out.
Yeah, and
the parking in their frontage will be limited.
Oh, they would still have right in, right out.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But if you can stay within 10 feet, you might. For the Churchill piece.
And then I just had one other thing when Vicky was asking about the buffer on the east side of Alma. Just want to make sure it's clear that our previous iteration didn't have a buffer. They wouldn't be having that buffer for their own use otherwise. And yeah.
If I could just point out one more thing. So all of this that we're finalizing today, since we're not going back to council, essentially remains as kind of a stopping point, and then gets handed over to what Caltrain is now going to look at under the services agreement. And just as a reminder for everybody, Caltrain is still looking at bridge deck thickness, 4 tracks, all this other stuff. So this isn't the end of all be all of what the design's going to be, because they may still come back and say, oh, actually, there's an encroachment that you can't do. Or, there's still a lot of other things. So despite the fact that we're going into kind of nitty gritty detail, I just really want to
We're not settling on design
and make sure everybody, including the public, understands that this is still open to a lot of other stuff that Caltrain is coming back to us. And so, don't panic if you don't see your favorite thing happening right now.
Yeah, thank you for adding that context. I was going to say that, that is one of the things that Caltrain has worked with some of our neighbors on, is bridge deck thickness as an example. And so that is something that, typically it's something that gets refined a little bit further along in the process. We're still in the conceptual design phase, as we'd call it. And so that is that kind of thing is typically a little bit later on in the process, unless you know that you're going to be able to do it, which in this situation, we don't exactly know that Caltrain's going to let
Well,
us.
but I think it's a really important question to get at the front. I don't understand why there would be any real barrier to it. And in discussions preliminarily with Caltrain, they haven't expressed any apprehension about that. They've done similarly right down the road at Rengstorff. And the sooner that we start assuming that we have a thinner bridge deck, the sooner we can incorporate more favorable refinements to the design. Yeah.
And by all means, assuming the most minimum deck of the bridge that we can accomplish, and that's what we
right. But up in the 3-4 years until now, we haven't incorporated that, and that's why I think it's really imperative that the sooner we do it, the better. Vicky?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what you were just touching on, Chair Bird, about the 4 foot, the additional 4 foot, and I have it enlarged on my screen. I'm looking at the green areas, that setback. I'm wondering what the genesis was of that, and I'm wondering if we explored other safety alternatives such as fencing or something. I'm just concerned about the public looking at this and thinking about this 4 foot taking, or I don't know what the right words are for it, but I just like to understand a little bit more about how we came to this version we're looking
at. Certainly, there were different options that we looked at. Vertical barriers become a side distance issues when exiting the driveway, so there's nothing that we could add vertically, and horizontal was, and even for the vertical, when you put some kind of it requires some footings and other additional horizontal features as well. And this, based on the discussions at the rail committee previously, it also provides opportunity for landscaping and making it more nicer for those neighbors in the frontage. And it's still kind of an extension of their property. It's just that maintain and it can have maintenance agreement that they maintain it, becomes like an extension of their property, but it requires that the sidewalk be.
This slide, the lower left, that rendering that's there. I'm wondering if maybe we could pull up for context a rendering of what we had previously, which did not have that 4 feet, because I think that's really where your predecessors on the rail committee decided that this was necessary, was looking at what would be there without the 4 feet.
Essentially, council member, is what you had was just sidewalk and then road. So if you're walking as a mom with the little kids and you've got cars zipping past and there's literally not a tree, not a barrier, there's nothing. So that's why the conversation went towards, okay, could we at least put a planting strip back? Because as a walker, you're walking at least further inward, but it also allows for the garbage can issue, which, as if I was certainly living there, I would not want to drag my garbage cans all the way to the edge of the next street and then try to do them that way. So it allows for all of that, but without the hazards that Ripon pointed out, to say having hard barriers. I don't know if you've been to London, they've got those kind of cattle fence, kind of the planting strip just was kind of the better option than putting a hard fence, right? Like a car barrier.
Well, but when you say hard fence, you don't mean opaque all the way. It doesn't have to be a wall. It could be a slatted fence, and that still presents. I'm more concerned about the safety thing, because honestly, I think being disconnected from Alma is kind of the point.
Right, but if you're driving and you hit that fence, you have a worse problem. So the plantings is kind of a softer.
And I guess it's a question of how does that differ from all the rest of Alma, the length of the city? We don't have a physical barrier between the sidewalk and Alma.
And
so
also
what we'd be doing is reestablishing a parking strip barrier, just a 4 foot, where the original design didn't have that, and we'd have that much of a buffer. Not to mention be landscaped, and we'd lose the landscaping under the previous iteration as well.
And just to confirm, that's what we have now. I'm trying to remember. I don't walk along.
Yes, it is. It's what we have all along Alma, where you have a planting strip and some sidewalk in, so that it matches the rest of the entire length of Alma citywide.
So for these properties, it's exactly what they have now, just in 4 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a reduction versus the parking strip, current parking strip, but yeah. So it's less, but previously it was non-existent in the proposal. They'd lose all, yeah.
And I'd like to also add that any vertical slats, we did look at even the vertical things, but they would also be a challenge for bikers, because if we have only 5 feet and you have a vertical fence or something, even at a short height, they become like any bikes to use that sidewalk as well. So from all that perspective, the horizontal buffer with landscaping provided more aesthetics, safety, and improvements for those neighborhoods.
Okay, but just to confirm, if we did the seal alternative, we don't have to worry about this. Or how much is still
No,
there?
this is an issue.
Still has to happen despite the,
Regardless of that, regardless of the ped bike.
This is happening because you need to shift the road slightly eastward so that you can have the one lane that sinks down and allows you to turn. So it's
Got it.
not related to the bike
Got
ped
it.
crossing. The only thing that would be different in terms of property impacts, if you looked at Seal, on the neighborhood side would be the pink part that's in Kellogg, and kind of as that little corner gets rounded, because you would no longer have a bike ped crossing there, you'd have it at Seal, right? So, but this planting strip part remains the same regardless of whichever you choose for the bike ped crossing.
I see, thank you.
And to add to what Nadia said is that we will also have similar improvements on Seal as that's represented on Kellogg because of the 16-foot bike lane that the fire lane that's located.
When you say improvements,
that would mean
that pink, so the pink strip would move. We
pink
can't see it
strip,
on that.
it would move. That's a ramp up. So that's like a ramp in the middle of the roadway. And then on both sides, the roads will be widened and their sidewalk will be relocated further westerly to provide for the 16 feet width on both sides of the road.
Yeah, so what Rippon's saying, this typical section that's on the screen here at Kellogg would be moved to Seal. It would no longer have the situation at Kellogg.
So would we likely have to remove the trees on each side of Seal like we
Right.
would here on Kellogg?
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, so the geometry on Kellogg is almost identical to that at Seal. So basically whatever we would do at Kellogg would, if we change the location to Seal, would need to occur at Seal.
Yeah. All right. So should we, to stay on schedule, move on to the Charleston East Meadow area?
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so this, I'm gonna start with Meadow. And again, similar to what was done at Churchill, the width of the ped bike ramps have been increased on this design layout from 10 to 12 feet in select locations. And I pointed to a few of these locations here on the slide here.
Is it okay to interrupt? We had one more public speaker on. Churchill.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Since I was here 2 years ago and there's some new council members.
That's right. Wait, just a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just like to say, I sat through XCAP committee meetings for 8 months here, and there's new council people here, and there's quite a few different people here, but there are two options. I mean, you've gone, Mike Price's plan is here and everything's all done, but I just do want to remind you, you do have option 2, which our city staff, Gary Black, they had that whole thing all worked out, how it was going to be Churchill closure plus mitigations. I just want to remind you all that was the XCAP recommendation at the time. And this, when you were discussing Seal for the bicycles, using Seal or using Embarcadero and how they're going to get across. Okay, since we have property on Churchill, I think you should look overall at the bicycle and pedestrians going from, I guess, Churchill all the way to Stamford, all the Stamford people riding their bikes across. It's not just Pali people using Churchill to access Pali. That was a very simplified, straightforward plan that obviously did not go forward. But since this is getting very complicated and has been complicated, you spent design hours and it was complicated from the beginning, my crisis plan. And there is another plan, just so in case this all doesn't work out. And I would hope that you would all kind of look at, we're a bicycle pedestrian city. The way this whole thing is going, and with all the money that's going into this plan, it's cars, it's vehicles, they got the priority. If you look at, I'm not sure how the bicycle committee has worked out all the routes through Palo Alto, but Churchill is only about 3 blocks long on the east side. That goes right into Stanford. That is a beautiful, okay, that's just my opinion, would be, if you were going to go back and look at it in terms of access for bicycles and pedestrians in Stanford and the community going across there, I think it's straightforward, a perfect place to have that Churchill closure with the bikes going under Churchill to go to Pali. It's right there. You're talking about Seal. You've got very complicated kind of things going in and out of the cars, but the original just Churchill closure plus the Kingsley, that, piece of land there, which I think you two council members were not involved at all for the XCAP, 9 months of going through this with the city staff and, all that whole procedure. So I just wanted to speak up about that, because you do have, if this all doesn't work out and you're going through so many permeations right now, the way I'm looking at it, that was a straightforward plan. And I mean, this looks amazing. Lots of stuff. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Burt, we have one raised hand from Penny Olson as well. Did you want to call on them as well?
Okay, if Penny wants to comment on the Churchill, she's welcome to, and just so she knows that we're going to then have public comment in just a couple minutes on the Charleston East Meadow area.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks. Well, first of all, I just want to say, kind of from the get-go, I have thought Seal was the better option for this part of town. And frankly, Seal and Kellogg just aren't that far apart from a bicycling perspective. It's a minute or two. And by comparison, if you look at the distance between Loma Verde and Charleston, for instance, which will be the detour for South Palo Alto kids, it's more like a 10-minute detour to get to Loma and go all the way back to Charleston. So my question to Philip Cami related to what he said earlier about front-loading the Kellogg versus Seal decision. When we're working on the BPTP, will you also be front-loading a decision about a dedicated bicycle pedestrian crossing for South Palo Alto simultaneous with that decision? Thanks.
Okay. Philip, did you want to respond to that at all, that last question?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so the scope of the BPTP includes really both of those decisions to kind of follow what the initial phase is, which is really 2 different things. It's gathering all the information that currently exists, which is like, putting together all the existing bike routes and all the existing information, and then the community outreach phase. And so both of those things are designated to occur in the BPTP in that early phase following the community input and the information gathering.
And they will be front-loaded simultaneously. They'll move forward together. South Palo Alto and the North Palo Alto options will all be front-loaded, correct?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure I'm following.
I'm asking the question for a reason. Later, don't get funded. So I would like them to move forward together.
So it's one report, one component of one task for the.
Okay.
There's not a north or south designation between it's just additional grade crossings for bicycle and pedestrians that's to be looked at. But noting that's just to identify them as potential projects. The work ahead of that will be to prioritize projects based on.
Clarify that it already is in the 2012 bike plan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to clarify one thing for Penny Ellison and members of the public. So the only reason that there are drawings for the Kellogg bike ped crossing and not for any of the ones discussed in South Palo Alto is very specifically because the one that's at Kellogg is needed because you cannot cross at the Churchill intersection. So it's directly tied to that specific grade separation project. Separately, XCAP and the council have supported the concept of adding 2 bike ped crossings, but that is not the reason there's no actual design for it yet is because it was not paid for as part of the study of the actual grade separation. So it's not an indication of our add-ons that we felt were important, but not required as part of the grade separation project. I think that's really important to clarify.
I'll just add one other context in my own mind, which is that I'm anticipating that the prioritization of the dedicated bike and ped crossings would be related to which will be the first vehicular crossings that we take on. And I'm anticipating that because of the difficulties at Churchill, that it's more likely that Charleston East Meadow will be done first. None of that's been decided, and therefore that would drive the need for the South Palo Alto bike and ped.
I think actually the council direction, correct me if I'm wrong, was that you start with Meadow Charleston and Churchill is actually second. I believe that's already part of previous council direction. Am I right, Steph?
So yeah, that's correct. Charleston Meadow was prioritized.
Yeah. Okay, great. Peter, you're back on.
Sounds good. All right, back to Meadow. And again, let me repeat this one real quick. So similar to what was done at Churchill, the width of the ped bike ramps have been increased from 10 to 12 feet at select locations on this design alternative routes. Similarly, the ped bike bridge over Meadow has been increased from 10 to 12 feet. And these bridges also for the 90-degree corners, again, similar to what we did at Churchill, the corners have been rounded to provide better line of sight and turning movement for bicyclists. You could see that a little bit better in the rendering here on the right here, the curved edge of the bridge. I don't believe this was discussed at the November meeting, but we did update our renderings and we're showing a cul-de-sac kind of layout on the north, I'm sorry, as you go northbound on Park on the south side of Meadow, as noted where those yellow arrows are. That's prohibit vehicular access from northbound Park onto Meadow because there's an elevation difference there. So we added a slide for that as well. Do you want me to proceed with Charleston or do you want to stop here for questions about Meadow?
Charleston.
Sounds good. Okay. The ped bike path on the north side of Charleston has been extended. As you can see here on the top of this layout, has been extended east to Carlson Court. The path width will be about 10 to 12 feet wide using the space available between. There will, however, likely be a relocation of the utility poles and undergrounding of those electrical lines would be preferred in this location to provide the space for pedestrians and bicyclists. Similarly, the path on the north side of the roundabout, we increased it to 20 feet to kind of provide a uniform width essentially from just east of Park Boulevard on the other side of the tracks to just west of a 4-foot buffer or planting strip proposed along Alma and around the south side of the roundabout. And again, to provide a more enjoyable, safer experience for pedestrians. And then focusing on the other side of the tracks, we again, similar to what we've already talked about, you could see on the bottom of the screen there, we increased it from 5 to 12 feet. It was originally 5 feet because it's really getting close to the homes there, the width of the ped bike path. So based on the meeting in November, we did increase it to 12 feet. Okay, we're almost done here. We also had some striping reconfigurations. This is more, really doesn't affect the ped and bike routes and the experience for the ped and bike users, but we did provide revised striping configuration to provide better operations, traffic operations for vehicles to change lanes, get the proper lanes before they enter the roundabout. The roundabout itself was also modified to provide a single lane on the east and west ends. That's worth noting as well. That's also been updated in the renderings. Were the renderings updated? Were they provided in the report? Great. So those should be shown in the report, updated report. And then lastly, this slide is just to show that we, I believe there's an exhibit shown. Was it in the report, Ripon, where we showed this as 12-foot lanes?
The original attachment.
Yeah, the original attachment showed 12-foot lanes on Charleston, but those have been updated to 11-foot lanes to make it more consistent with the.
Great, thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we should. I need to pass this over to Gary Black. He had one more thing to talk about. There was a alternative that was considered and evaluated by Gary Black's team at Hexagon. Gary, I'll pass it over to you for this slide.
Yeah, thank you. So I think there was a question that came up about could we put separate bike ped paths on each side of Meadow and Charleston instead of having the combined path on only one side. And the upshot of that at Meadow, and we don't want those paths to have any traffic that crosses those paths, so they need to be separated from everything. The upshot of that is there would no longer be any ramp connections possible between Alma and East Meadow. And without those ramp connections, then any traffic that wants to interface in that area with Alma would need to use Charleston. And the resulting increase in traffic on the connecting ramps on Charleston would just completely overwhelm the capacity of this design. And so even though we tested it, there were very, very long vehicular delays equal to level of service F and backups that would go through the roundabout. So basically it would be essentially a gridlock situation just because of the increase in traffic on those ramps. Vehicle traffic operation, this idea was a non-starter.
Okay, thank you. And the final slide.
Sorry, thank you. That's back to me. So next steps, this is all, as you all know, we've got the additional studies that are pending to come to Rail Committee for review that were directed by the council and got some input from Rail Committee. Those are pending. Then we've got the Caltrain service agreement, which just was approved at council last night, but still needs to have Caltrain approval before we can kick that off. And then beyond that, we've got the Rail Committee to review and potentially recommend selected a preferred alternative for any of the other locations, and then to recommend to City Council the approval of a preferred alternative in order to move into the next phase of design. With that, I guess we're happy to go on.
Charleston segment.
Okay, our first speaker is Penny Elson.
Thank you. Could I ask you to bring up slide 20 again, please? And I just want to say I'm seeing these for the first time. I was busy running Bike to Work week for the last couple of weeks, so I didn't even get a chance to look at this until today. And I found some of the slides kind of confusing because they referred to ramps and I didn't know what the ramps were. So I want to just ask, first of all, is that slide up? Because I don't see it. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. They're trying to pull it up.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to authorize it through the chair and as a informal committee.
So that's slide 18.
This one here?
Yes, that one there.
Okay.
So what I'm concerned about here is what we have now is a plan that eliminates a lot of turn traffic is going to get to Charleston to make those turning movements. If they can't turn at Alma Meadow, they're going to go through the neighborhoods. And those are school commute routes. Those are the routes the children are using to get through the neighborhood and avoid Alma. So have you looked at that? And what did you find? I mean, obviously it's overwhelming Charleston and that's not good, but how does the traffic get to Charleston with these turning movements removed?
So we'll go ahead and hear your comments and then let them respond afterward.
It's not feasible with the changes that we've, that actually make it accommodate bicycles on these streets. But as you were considering the changes you were making, were you looking systemically at the school commute routes as well? Have we been doing that through this entire process? We should be doing this. And that's my question, and I'm done.
Okay, thanks. Any other public commenters? Yeah, we did.
Our next speaker is Steve Rosenblum.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Steve Rosenblum. I live in Old Palo Alto, and at the last rail committee meeting, I spoke as a representative of a group of fellow Palo Altans who strongly support the viaduct as the best means of grade separation for the future of our city. At that time, I compared the Churchill partial underpass alternative to the viaduct and demonstrated that the viaduct is cleaner and simpler and allows all vehicular turn viaduct. Today, we've heard more discussions about the complicated details of the hybrid alternatives at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston, about the complicated traffic motions that are needed to accomplish bicycle ped separation and accomplishing all the turns and traffic mitigations. I urge you to look carefully at the animations and renderings of the Meadow Charleston Viaduct that were removed from consideration on August 23rd, 2021 on the connectingpaloalto.com website. And the same site, they make a compelling case for the viaduct. There's no shoe fly track needed, and Alma remains fully open during construction because the width of the right-of-way allows construction of the viaduct to be shifted 60 feet to the east on the present right-of-way and allows Caltrain to continue operation on the existing tracks during construction. After completion of the project, the existing Caltrain tracks will be removed and a park-like greenway could be created on the site abutting the backyards of Palo Altans living on Park Boulevard. There's minimal impact to barren intersections is put in place. All vehicular turning motions will be allowed, and peds and bikes will freely cross when lights change, all at the present ground level. The most important issue still open is the cost difference between the highest about how to make an unworkable solution work, that they actually look into the difference in funding required to fund a viaduct versus the hybrid. Right now, at the low level of cost estimation, it looks like there's a several $100 million difference. If that difference were to get smaller, it might make the viaduct the slam dunk in terms of cost benefit.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, the Rail Committee, on presenting this, awesome, rail remodeling or like new construction project. So I'm a resident of the Carson Circle, and I have, two questions. About the first question is that when we in the earlier section of the meeting we discussed the the quiet zone idea of the joint initiative with Menlo Park City. I'm just wondering, was this initiative in Meadow and Carson, will we also consider, for example, establish a simple, planning for the underpass to solve the long-term problem of making Caltrain like safer to the community? This is first question. And the second question is that for the underpass projects, I know by looking at the real committee meeting history, it seems that there are a couple years of discussion on what we can do here, and there are definitely some back and forth on different options to consider the preferred way of doing this. I'm just curious to know, like, is there an external like agenda that we are aligning with? So, for example, I hear some community member mentions there's a funding cycle from the county that maybe you can take advantage of. Like, I'm just curious to know, in terms of timeline wise, like, are we expecting, like continuous discussion until we find a perfect solution, or there is some, external agenda that we want to align so that, maybe at a certain time, let's cut the discussions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So first we can now return to the committee. Maybe one of the first things we could do is Penny Elson had raised questions on to what extent have we really been looking at bike and ped safe routes to school impacts of the alternatives. And in that context, I wanted to put out on the table that at our last meeting, we had, I forget the name of the member of the public, not you, maybe folks who had been interested in exploring a dedicated bike and ped crossing in the vicinity of Lindero on the east side and Robles Park on the west side, which would presumably require acquisition of one property on the Park Boulevard. But I just wanted to sense that alternative may be related to looking at the whole bike ped dilemma of this. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, that is something we have on our list to look at.
And can you also just comment on the question of to what extent have all these alternatives been looking at safe routes to school?
Yeah, well, yes, and just more broadly, I guess what we're hoping that any of these grade separations, as they currently stand, that's really the gain that every one of these alternatives does get. There are some that, really, as the example, the viaduct's really easy. The viaduct just lifts it over and everybody goes under, and you have potential right of way that you can use under. Each of the different alternatives have different, they're changing the bike and ped access, but they're keeping the same networks connected. So I think that's kind of how I would look at it from my perspective.
I'll add just one other thing, that really any of the grade separations give us the opportunity to have full.
Penny's Ellison's comments, and realizing that she said she wasn't able to read the full packet in advance, but I actually had two members of the public also contacted me about this, is that it was unclear in the staff report, or if you just read it quickly, it made it seem like we were considering adding bike ped paths on either side of the alternative. And then you have Gary Black's thing that basically shows that it fails. And so I think what was unclear was, is that actually being a change that's being made to the way the alternative design is designed? And I'm assuming that you need, who are looking at it are like, well, how, if we're changing this design now and it fails, why are we even looking at this, right? And I think it's really important to say that this was in response to an idea that was brought forth by members of the public from the biking community, because the route is a bit more circuitous. Why couldn't we have things on two sides? And that the work done by Gary Black makes it clear that it was going to fail the traffic alternative, which I believe was my comment the last time, because we had talked about that in committee when XCAP looked at. Underpass with all of its warts actually performs the best out of all of the alternatives when it comes to those same traffic studies. So.
Vicky, did you have anything?
Just a couple of quick questions. And they're about the Charleston west of Mumford. I know you mentioned that any property impacts would be the same as the design before, but since I probably wasn't around with the design before, could you tell me more specifically what those are? As I enlarge this, it looks like a couple of homes on the south side, perhaps?
You want to tackle that one, Griffin? Yeah, that's correct, council member. There's two parcels on the south side of the roundabout. There will be acquisitions to those in this new configuration that doesn't change. I think I may have misspoke slightly. I think because of the increased width of the ped bike path on the north side of the roundabout, there is additional here on this side here. Can you see my mouse?
Yes.
So there's a slight increase in the acquisitions on that side of the roundabout.
So on the other side of the roundabout,
on the north side of the
yes,
roundabout.
yes,
So
on the other
side.
yes, on the other side of the roundabout, the south side, are those entire parcels that would need to be acquired?
That's correct.
I see, but on the north side, it would just now be
Partial.
part of the backyards.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. And then my other question, then we talked about the increase on the west side of that crossing, the west side of Alma, of the bike path from 5 to 12 feet. And I just wanted to confirm whether there was any property impact from that.
Yeah, that's correct. There's additional property impacts as a result of the wider ped bike path, especially between Ruthelma and Park, that ped bike path of Charleston.
And so on the south side of Charleston, were there previous property acquisitions and this would just be increased, or were there none before?
That's right. There were partial acquisitions and there's still partial acquisitions, but they would be more significant.
Okay, and on the north side?
On the north side, there was an acquisition in this corner,
Mhm.
and that doesn't change. Just east of Park, just north of Charleston.
Okay, so the north side acquisitions don't change, the south side partial acquisitions increased. So
that's right.
And the south side acquisitions remain partial but increased somewhat.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Although I guess I would say that, we obviously have to get the best plan for, overall, but I just don't take those pieces very lightly. So we just have to factor that in. Thank you.
Ed?
Yeah, I actually concur with both that question and that last comment that you made, Councilmember Maker. It's serious business. The only other question I had was along Alma, the graphic.
That's correct. Let me pull up that slide.
It just looks sort of bushier in terms of, I didn't know if you were proposing something.
It may look bushier, but the concept is essentially similar to what we showed at Churchill.
Yeah, I don't see actually the barriers there. I just see trees. So that's.
Let me zoom it unless there we go. I don't know what the maximum zoom is. Let me try 400.
Oh, yeah. Promise something. I didn't know we could. Didn't know we could do that.
You can do it on the iPad.
Oh,
just I tried to do it earlier.
You pinch your finger.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, look, it still looks greener there to me, so I didn't know if that was just a difference in the rendering or if it was a difference in construction.
It almost looks like there's 2 rows of trees, but maybe
Yeah.
it's just an illusion. I'm not sure with the shadows.
It looks like 2 rows of trees and a big fence.
think.
Wondering if there was something particularly about this
No.
phase of Alma that would require something different.
No. Yeah, it'd be
Okay.
similar to what was shown at Churchill.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
Yeah, Vicky?
Thank you. I just a brief follow-up to my question before about the bike pedestrian path increase to 12 feet on the west side of Alma and on the south side of that back rule where we can only get so close to the homes. And I assume we've checked to make sure that we accommodate that. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, we haven't done that. I'm not sure. Then that might be something we need to look into about how close we can get to those homes without doing a full acquisition.
That's exactly my point, because at some point I assume it would trigger a whole parcel purchase, which
right,
is
which
a
we're trying
different
to avoid.
decision. Yes.
Yeah.
And we might also consider some exceptions because most of the time it would be the driveway depth that we would need to be concerned with. That's one of the areas, because we certainly are not getting into the building proximity, but the driveway depth also needs to be looked at. So that exercise will do it as well.
Practice to, I mean, I know we have to look from the city side, but to discern whether at some point the property owner would rather just have their entire parcel acquired than to have it, a very short driveway and a very close bike path. I mean, how does one navigate that?
Yeah, that's all part of the negotiations that would occur.
And just to point out, in this case, those are actually the backyards because that's the back of the homes, not the driveways. On the north side of, on the
South.
north side of Charleston. See, if you look at the diagram.
I was talking about the
pink side.
south side, I think, 'cause
Okay,
that's
yeah.
where the bike path is widened. And I had assumed those
No,
are
the bike
backyards,
path's
but they were
on the north side.
She's talking about
west of Alma.
Yeah, she's talking about west of
I see.
between
Yeah, so
Rizal
west
and
of Alma, south side of Charleston,
I
the
see what
bike
you're
path
saying.
got widened. And I was asking, and he had said, I think it's getting pretty close to the homes there. And so I
Right.
was following up on that. And so that would be, dealing with that would be part of the negotiation. But that is the front side of the homes and the driveways are implicated, or is that the back side?
No, that is the front side.
Okay. Okay.
Between Ruth-Elma and Park, they're fronting Charleston. The driveways are from Charleston.
It's reverse. Thank you.
I think Nadia thought you were talking about the other side of the tracks over here.
Okay. So I did want to make sure I understand why we think the bike and ped path needs to be 20 feet. As I think about points of reference, the one that down, well, actually from the Homer Tunnel down to Churchill, and it's inadequate because I don't know what the width of that is. It seems like it's about 8 feet. Does that sound correct?
Talking about Homer?
The bike ped path on the west side of the tracks that runs from, and it's really not adequate when you're having pedestrians and bikes there, but it's not grossly inadequate. I mean, people get by, they have to mind their staying on their correct side and things. So, but a 12-foot widening of something like that. But then we've got 20 here on the north side of Charleston. So can you talk me through why that's needed as it starts running into other issues?
Bring up this real quick. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah. So the path that you're talking about, the Embarcadero bike path, for example, right next to Pally, there's just open air, right? There's no walls on each side. So one of the considerations was, we have, let me see if I can get a good image of it.
Well, there's on the Pally side,
So
and so it's probably got physically with the shoulders, it's probably a good 12 feet.
Right. So in this configuration, we're essentially going to need retaining walls on both sides for the length of it.
Where are we in this slide, please? What streets are these here?
Yeah, this is out here. I'm gonna zoom back out. This is the Charleston layout. This is looking west.
Okay.
This is Alma, of course. This is Park from this frontage as well. So and then there's backyards over here on this side. So there's walls on both sides. We thought 20 was appropriate, 10 feet in each direction.
Well, if there weren't trade-offs, I would absolutely welcome a 20-foot bike and ped path. But we do have some trade-offs, and so then it comes down to how significant are the trade-offs, and what would be still a safe in that. If you take, for instance, the Homer Tunnel, we've got the pedestrian walkways about 2.5 feet on each side, and then whatever it is, about maybe 4 feet on the bike portion, which.
Yeah, this was actually loosely modeled after Homer.
But this is 20.
Homer is
right?
about 19 feet wide.
Is it in the open?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think for the pedestrian section has to be at least 4 feet, I believe for 80.
4 sounds good, yeah.
Yeah, and then we're 10 feet roughly. Yeah.
The underpass?
No, I'm talking about the actual bike path throughout. You had, I believe you were referencing that earlier. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It was a little bit over 10 feet.
Interesting.
So yeah, generally the bike path, class 1 bike path by Caltrans standards, about 8 feet minimum with 2 feet clearances on both sides, about 12 feet in width. And this was definitely established before on basis of Homer Tunnel kind of configuration for the bike path facilities here. And so that was feasible so as to accommodate the high volume.
I just want to make sure that that it wasn't that it was fully adequate and not more than that, given some of the other trade-offs, and it sounds like that's what we think is needed.
I mean, safe route to school input and the PAUSD input probably guided that width, but if council, there's some means 20 feet is certainly a wide for a bike path.
Yeah, and we were hearing about, and that's, I just want to make sure that we were providing what we need, but that if it's more than that, it was being recognized, the difference. But it sounds like we're convinced it's the 20-foot. These projects get a little less impactful, not drastically.
Yeah, and I think the intent here was, to have a separate bike and separate pedestrian. If there was a combination, like what you're saying, like if it was a combined facility of using bike and ped together, then definitely a reduced width could.
Have recommendations for the council for consideration. Is this one where we should have kind of the any revisiting of the committee's thoughts on the viaduct?
I was actually just thinking about this earlier. It's possible. I was wondering if maybe a potential future item the rail committee might want to consider, and I'm not actually would need to check with Tim to see whether that could be even something that we could do today. But look or any other alternatives, either for consideration or disconsideration against the revised evaluation criteria. And maybe that might be a possible path to making a recommendation.
We're reviewing and approving the revised conceptual plans. Would those not go to council then, like Nadia was asking about before?
Yeah, so I don't think these need to go to council. I think that's actually your prerogative as well. What I would suggest is when the rail committee wants to make a recommendation, as an example, if it wanted to recommend that the council select this as a preferred alternative and maybe consider this as a preferred alternative with this refinement, does select the partial underpass as a preferred alternative with Seal or Kellogg, as the selected alternative. I think that's the potential path that I think would make sense in order to do that. But open to your suggestions as well.
Yeah, and then we have this question of what gets forwarded to Caltrain for their review. Do we need to go to council, or are we good enough from prior council direction that and the authority that the council had given this committee to review the refinements that it then gets passed directly to Caltrain? I'm just trying to think that through.
So we already have council direction for rail committee to take on these refinements. So from that standpoint, I don't think we need to go back. I think that this committee can decide these refinements we want to share with Caltrain and have them evaluate or not.
Just want to make sure. Thanks.
That's my understanding.
And Nadia?
Oh, and just to note, I think the new alternative or old alternative, if it may.
Follow up is, are you also suggesting that we get sort of revised cost estimates? So we know what we're really looking at there?
Well, that becomes part of the issue. Certainly, if we were going to look at another alternative, like a viaduct.
Like orders of magnitude higher.
Yeah, well, yeah, great. What was it for? I'm thinking for just the Charleston East Meadow, what was the comparison that we had? We had a range on each. Said 100.
Yeah, I'm remembering something around 500.
You need the matrix.
But yeah.
If you're actually getting a cost estimate through Caltrain's work.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if I may, today it's agendized for you guys to finish up the design refinements the council had already given rail committee the approval to do. If you want to talk about the viaduct in this committee before it goes to council, you'd need to agendize it as a future meeting so that members of the public would be aware that that was coming back up, and you would have a lot more people in the room because there are definitely people interested in that topic. Looking at the viaduct, but that we'd wait until September or August or whenever the geotechnical work comes back, because if the trench gets removed from alternatives, you may want to consider putting the viaduct back in. But if you want the committee to have discussed that before it went to full council to then talk about it full council, you'd need to agendize it sooner rather than later to make that happen.
Yeah. That's really where mine was going. The only question that I have is if the rail committee thinks that you have enough information to make a decision. If you think, for example, you think that the existing criteria or the updated criteria helps to inform, what alternatives would be preferred at this time, or maybe not preferred, but which alternatives we should be considering at this time, and to make that decision, then I think that it's worth having that discussion. I don't know that we need to wait for the geotechnical, but that's really
once we've looked at all the factors, embrace that as an alternative, but because we have new members of the council who have been very interested in making sure that it was fully evaluated, and members of the public. And I think that out of fairness, at the time that we reviewed it, but that there will be, when we agendize it, there will be these other factors that are in our criteria, like cost at a big level, and traffic inducement, another very significant one. So either way, I favor agendizing it the upcoming meeting and giving it a objective consideration.
I did have a few more questions.
Okay.
So since we still have Gary Black here, I think a question had come up in a conversation we had offline about the traffic study had originally looked at whether the underpass worked well with the circle being at Mumford, and later it moved away from Mumford and closer to the intersection. And there was a question about, does that impact the validity of the traffic study? And therefore the movement of the traffic circle forward does not impact the results of the traffic study. And I'm wondering if Gary is still around and can.
Yeah, I can answer that. The study's been updated. I don't know. I mean, we haven't published new data, but there's a new simulation on the city website that shows the how the roundabout would operate in the current plan location. And we've done a lot of analysis of this location to satisfy ourselves.
That we had asked Gary to reevaluate to make sure that we confirm the operations of the roundabout at this new location, and we confirmed that it was working fine.
Does it produce the same results in terms of B's, C's, D's, whatever?
Yeah, the level of service would be the same, but it was the operations for the shorter merging lane.
Right.
So
second is, I was just gonna mention, I know of at least two members of the public who sent in public comment to the committee, or sent it to full city council and to staff, but I did not see it as part of today's packet, and I did not see the printouts at today's, like, try to stick it in the rail committee's agenda, because otherwise it gets lost and members of the public wouldn't see it, because I know there were two specific comments about today's presentation that we kind of missed seeing, at least members of the public might have missed seeing. Specifically, Elizabeth Alexis and Eric Nordman, I know, sent in comments.
There was one more than, there were a total of 3 comments that we received, the rail committee received, and I was forwarded, yes.
And if you had a chance to review those, because I know those are people who have put some serious
Yes, but I guess what specific question or comment within it, or did
I don't have them in front of me.
I would just say at a high level, it kind of backs up to the conversation we were having earlier, which is that this is still all going to be impacted on whether or not we have a decision on forward tracks, bridge deck thickness, construction methods, all of those things. So in some ways, some of the comments that we got, I know Eric Nordman's related, I think, to the bike ped crossing, the new bike ped crossing concept between Meadow and Charleston coming out of the circle, graphic models to bikes. So it relates to the fact that we were waiting for those dot maps. And so where do these bikes, we're looking at the width of this bike path without really an understanding. We understand where the main traffic movements are, and that the underpass has been designed for that, but we have not actually considered where the majority of the bikes coming and going from. The assumption has been that it's on the north side of Charleston and the south side of Meadow, but one of the things that's in there is actually doing a grade separation study for bikes and pedestrians only. And I don't know if that's now the concept is that would be looked at through the bike ped master plan, but the idea of trying to look at the O&D of most of those bikes and kind of what the needs would be and how that might change the design is not something I think we need to do for this phase, but certainly after Caltrain takes a look at the general numbers, you're going to need it for the next phase. Changes, and that also changes the traffic studies for later in the future. So you're going to have to redo a lot of this stuff anyway. And so it's okay to just kind of put these in with caveats and notes that, hey, when we look at the designs again, we should consider the dot maps, we should consider the new housing allocations, we should consider those. But maybe it's not necessarily appropriate to change any of the designs now for whenever we pick up this next piece, would be my suggestion. That's it.
Okay, so we can do a wrap up on the specific asks, and I just want to make sure that we're understanding kind of where it fits in the process. So I think, as Nadia pointed out, we can keep our feedback today more narrow to these specific alternatives, with having laid out kind of where we still need to go and moving forward to Caltrain now that we have the contract with them. All right, so then let's break this up between the Churchill and East Meadow feedback. On the Churchill, the one thing that I think we had maybe as a recommendation is whether to focus on Seal over Kellogg.
Yeah, I don't think we can afford both. So, yes.
And have you been able to look at the dot maps yet? And do they support that?
Yeah, well, just to say that the dot maps on their own are just actually really hard to read, frankly. But no, I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a definitive answer from that on its own, which is why we were hoping to look at it in conjunction with collecting public feedback.
Would discourage us from going through any significant additional expenditures at this time on the Clerk.
I think it's fair to say that also through this process of doing additional refinements, we're finding additional benefits to SEAL.
Oh, good.
As well. I mean,
Okay.
as well as evidenced by like the bleacher discussion.
Any of that and anything else? I think you've got our consensus.
No, I don't believe we need a vote.
Okay.
I think if we do get a vote that these are approved, then we will consider that these are the final plans, and we will make sure that these are the updated plans we will use and consider that as an approved plans moving forward.
Great.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is we don't need to take it as individual votes for each thing unless there's issues with consensus.
And then is there any additional feedback on the Charleston and East Meadow? What I think I heard was that we are supportive of these refined conceptual plans there at this time, including that recognizing that the
Concern to, minimize acquisition in however we can, if we can save 2 feet or 4 feet somewhere relative to all these folks we're gonna have to negotiate with. I think that'd be helpful for all parties.
So just to note, I think that is already a principle, is that we would try and minimize right-of-way impact. But I do have one more question going back to Churchill, if I can, and this ties to the extra landscaping, because that's one that I'm not sure that I heard consensus on.
So are we supportive of adding the 4-foot buffer alternative?
Yeah, I am.
And so just to confirm that it's really sort of swapping the sidewalk and grass area from the prior plan. It's otherwise not different in terms of the amount of land, so to speak.
No, there is a difference.
Yeah, it adds land to.
So originally the right of way is behind the sidewalk, new landscaping buffer. The total area that we have is from the face of curb 9 feet. That requires an additional 4 feet of the property from the fronting property owner.
Yeah, I think I didn't say that well. The roadway is in the same spot. We may be taking 4 feet of property, which I don't take lightly. But in terms of the, it's basically swapping where the sidewalk and the grass was. It's just that obviously when we do that, the city gets that extra 4 feet where the sidewalk now is. Is that right? Yes.
So originally that 4 feet of grass belonged to the property.
I've lost track of what the question is, but
Yeah, just wanted to clarify me.
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like we have consensus on the new buffer proposal. And I don't think there's any other
our attorney on what the language should be for a motion, and just if I could recommend that it would be to direct staff to make these refinements. What is it? As our what do you think? As
or to that the committee has supported approved the refined conceptual plans for purposes of forwarding them to Caltrain for their review with the changes of the 4-foot buffer in the Churchill area and the focus on the bike ped pattern. I don't know, at configuration. Sorry, at Charleston.
Second.
We'll see if
And maybe any other improvements as presented, because there may be some minor improvements like we talked about, increasing the width of the bike path.
Okay,
from 10 to
and
12 feet.
yeah, I thought that would be within the refined conceptual plans, but
Thank you.
that's already there, right? Yeah, got it.
See the motion?
Yeah, let's see. We'll see if
Did you catch that, Vin?
they're working on it.
The attorney said that sounded good to him.
Can I just request that we post the newest traffic study?
Yeah, so Chair Burt, something we've been considering just internally is we've got this Caltrain service agreement. And in light of some of the discussion that we've heard regarding the trench, we're thinking maybe we are gonna not have Caltrain.
It would be good to include in this motion is, and we can say, and we probably should break this up into bullets. And we'll add one more bullet at the end that is, and to not refer the trench alternative to Caltrain at this time.
If I may, anything related to the trench. And if I was a trench lover, I would be really upset that you just said that. And so I just don't know that if we can do that in this kind of motion. I mean, I understand the intent and I don't want to spend any extra dollar. I think.
Yeah, that's why I was, and apologies for interrupting, but that's why I was suggesting that as staff, we could just decide that.
Yeah, you can decide the order.
We'll hold on
It's
this.
at this time. So what we are doing is affirmatively referring to things that were agendized and clarifying that we're not referring something that wasn't agendized. Okay, let's see how this reads. We'd say with the following.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Shimizu by Zoom. For number 4, maybe you just want to put no action is being taken on the trench alternative at this time and will be the subject of a future agenda.
Good enough.
Yeah, just to clarify that no one's deciding anything. It's just nothing literally is being done on it because it will be.
For the first one, are you saying you support the 4-foot buffer, right? It just says the 4-foot buffer.
Yeah, we'll say support. Okay, this all look good?
Nope.
No?
Your chair now. There we go. He's changing it on the fly. There we go.
Just to clarify, I think you want to say support the 4-foot buffer along Alma Street at Churchill.
At Churchill and.
Well, I guess maybe.
Along Alma in the vicinity of Church.
Let's really support the 4-foot buffer refinement.
Yeah.
Along Alma.
Okay. 4-foot buffer refinement along Alma. Great. That look good? Well, we got a motion and a second. We got that. I couldn't remember. All right, go ahead and.
Chair Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
the motion carries 3-0.
Hallelujah. Okay, future meetings and agendas. So one we talked about looking at reviewing the viaduct in the context of the revised criteria at a future agenda. And we're looking at a June meeting, and if so, is that
the additional studies or anything like that that would be ready for June? So if you would like us to bring the viaduct and or the trench potentially to that meeting, I'm not sure if you wanted to do them both simultaneously or if you wanted to wait.
Studies, sorry.
So, yeah, the geotechnical.
Yeah.
That was that August or October? I can't remember which you said.
Well, we've got fall, so there's a few different end dates, but in fall. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of.
Yeah, we could, I think, go ahead and have at a minimum the viaduct and updates, and maybe we'll have a shorter meeting.
Yeah.
Sure, but may I suggest maybe if we are discussing the different alternatives and considerations that we have at the next meeting, then maybe we can also look into the scope of additional work that is required as part of the consultant, because there are some additional components that we have added into the matrix. And then as part of that discussion of matrix evaluation, consider the scope of the inclusion or elimination of any alternatives from consideration, making recommendations to the council.
Sorry, but are you talking about the A?
Okay, that sounds great. That'd be the second agenda item. Very good. All right. And that would be on the 20th of June, and then no meeting in July.